Everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today we are going to be working with the Sew Felt Animals book, and we're going to be making the head for Bertie Bear here. So Bertie is one of the characters in this book by Claire Bowman, who is the designer at Lilly Rose Dolls, and she put out this book earlier this year with the different characters. Now I've already made the Highland Cow, so you can either make Emma or Byron. It's the clothes that change the gender, and today it's the turn of Bertie Bear's head. Now the other thing that you might want to know as well is that the limbs and the body on Lilly Rose Dolls characters, all the ones in the book, are all generic. So therefore what you can do is you can jump ahead and make the body or the limbs, got a little stuffing coming out of this one, but the stuffing, the legs of your characters already whilst you're waiting for the videos to come out on the other characters, because the elephant and the fox will follow shortly as well when I get time and get round to it. So in order to make Bertie's head, we are going to be working with the pattern from the book, and I'm going to show you all of the steps that you need between this video and some other videos that I've already got put up for you, so that you can had an idea of how to make these characters from the ones I've already made before. And then we'll jump straight into making Bertie's head specifically. Okay, let's get started. So I'm just going to show you this Bertie Bear. This is the one that I made as my sample character, and I've made him in grey. The new one is going to be in brown, as you can see the difference in colours there. And I just wanted to sort of show you how the kind of finish that we're going to get for our character. Now just bear in mind that in my experience, as you clothe and then choose to put a hat on or not for your character, the personality of your character comes out. So when you first make your first doll, they're going to look like this, but then as you add the different elements of their clothes, that's how their personalities come through. So sometimes I've had people in my sewing support group make a head or start to make a character and be disappointed with the outcome. But then as the clothes and everything come together, suddenly that disappointment turns to delight as they realise that they've actually made something that they love. So just trust the process and just bear with it. Okay, let me just shush talking for now, and Bertie and I are going to show you how to make a companion for him with a head. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is buy your book. If you're outside of the UK, the best place to get your book from is Amazon, because Lilly Rose Dolls, the website, doesn't ship internationally at the time of filming. If you live within the UK, you can choose to get your book from the UK if you want to, but it is also available on Amazon. And so if you're used to a fast delivery rather than a few days delay, then Amazon might be your chosen route. Okay, so what I have done is let's just have a think. Let's get the head for Bertie first, get the pattern. So here we go. So you will notice that some of the animal parts, the body, the arm and the leg, are all universal. They're all common across all of the characters. So I've actually traced off my pattern, I've added my seam allowance, and then I've made a cardboard template that I can just put onto my fabric and draw around. Just remember that when you're using your felt, especially if there's one side is different to the other, you'll need to mirror your pieces. So you'll need to cut two out with the writing on the top, and you'll need to cut two out with the writing underneath, and that will give you the correct side of your felt on the outside of all of your character. It's called mirroring. If you look through my channel and search mirroring, you will then see some of the videos that I've done on why we have to mirror our characters in order to make sure we get a left and a right for each one. Okay, so that's there for you for there. But the same principle is applied to the parts for the head. So what I've done here is I've gone straight into the book and I've actually added on my seam allowance in the book, because then if I lose any pattern pieces, because I'm going to recommend that you trace off your pattern pieces, I can come back to the book and that seam allowance is already there for me. This is because I'm used to working with a seam allowance. If you're one of the sewists that prefers to work without a seam allowance, then you would trace off on your main, on the solid line, and then you would then draw around that, and that would then be your sewing line. So the dark black line is the sewing line, and then the pencil line for me is a cutting line. And it depends which way you work. There's merits in both. There's no right or wrong way. There's always several ways to do things in sewing anyway. But for me, I've added my seam allowance on to my head gusset, to my ear, apart from this bottom opening just here, and onto the side head here as well. I've done that. Now the bare nose you don't need to add any seam allowance to, so I've just cut one of those out as it is. And all I do is, when I've added my seam allowance on, is I get some tissue paper, I put it over the top, and then I draw around the line, including any lines that you need or markings, and then I cut that out. And then what you're left with then is a plastic pattern, not plastic, a paper pattern like this one here. I can just show you. So there's the nose. Here's the ear, of which I will cut out 4 because we need 2 inner ears of fabric and 2 outers of felt. There's my side head. And then here's my head gusset. Okay, so if you want to get yourself to that stage, I mean, also if you just won't lose any pieces that way because you've always got your book intact to come back to. I also believe that the templates for the patterns are available on the publisher's website, and if you log in there or create an account there, you can then download all of the patterns in the book and print those out individually. So just know you don't have to cut up your book in order to make these characters. Okay, once we've done that, then we can have a look at the instructions, and that will tell us how to make your character, or if you prefer, you can follow along with me. Just know that I don't follow the instructions always step by step. I do change my construction slightly. So on here, we are adding the side gusset first before we do the chin seam, but I prefer to do the chin seam first. So you can try it both ways, see which you prefer, or you can just watch me and just do it the way that I do it, and just know that you will end up with a head like this one. And he looks pretty mighty fine to me, I think, and I hope you agree. Okay, so you can carry on with confidence knowing that we're going to get you to a finished character. So once you've got your pattern traced off, then you're going to move across to your felt. This is a wool viscose felt. This is bought from the same shop that Claire Bowman, the designer, frequents for her supplies. And this is available in the UK from a place called Quorn Country Crafts. And that's where I purchased this one from, and they do a mail order service, and they also have all of the different colours in should you wish them. So this one's the brown. You can see I've already used it to cut out the body and the limbs already. Don't think I've quite used 1/2 metre yet. No, not quite used 1/2 metre yet, but I probably will do by the time we've finished. Okay, so we're going to use the felt singularly. I prefer to cut out singularly, and I will have a look at my felt and see which side of the felt I prefer. I prefer this side, so let's turn that over. And then I will then start to get my pattern pieces for marking those out. Okay, so we've got our side head, and we need to cut out 2. Now, when I'm cutting these out, because I've got a particular side of the felt I want to use, I'm going to draw out one with the writing the correct way up, and then I'm going to turn my pattern piece over and do the other one. So when I cut out these two heads, the noses will touch. So that is something that you can do too. You can pin your pattern pieces onto your fabric in order that they don't move. Now, and also felt doesn't really have a nap at all to it, so you can draw around it in any direction you like. So let's just draw around this one. So just hold the pattern edges down with my fingers to make sure that it doesn't shift as I'm tracing it out. I'm just using an ordinary pencil here, and I'm just going to go around his face, making sure that I don't shortchange him in any area. We want a nice chin, we want a nice nose. So once that one's drawn out, and we can see that outline just here, and then I can move on to doing another one. And I do try to get the most out of my fabric. So that was drawn that way, so this needs to be turned the other way for the correct mirroring of this pattern. And I will try and move my pattern pieces together just so that I can try and get the best out of my felt and make it go as far as possible. That feels like quite a good fit. So let's pop that pin in there. So you can do the same too. And then I'm going to do this with all of the pattern pieces. Just remember that you only need to do one of the head gusset, that's only cut one. The side, the heads, the noses, when on your top of your fabric, need to be pointing together, and these two will be when I put them together. And then I can cut out two of my ears as well. They need to be cut out. And you can put your pattern pieces right up close to each other as well. So you don't need to leave any gap between them because the seam allowance has already been marked on them for mine. If you are cutting out without a seam allowance on your pattern pieces, just remember you need to leave that edge so that you can cut out yours correctly. So again, I can get another one out of just here, I think, as well, maybe that way around. So just go ahead and trace out your pattern pieces, and then we're going to cut those out, and then we'll be ready to start. Just remember that your little nose will also need to be cut out of a different colour felt, because the nose is a contrast colour to the main character. It doesn't matter if you use black or use a grey or whatever colour you need, but in order for that character to have his distinctive nose, then you'll need to have it as a different colour felt. So cut that out of your other colours. Okay, so when you finish cutting out your pieces, you'll have the two heads with the noses touching right side up. You'll have your head gusset, and you'll have your two outer ears. And then I've also got my nose, which I've kept in the bag just out of the way in my contrast colour. Now you will get some little scraps. I mean, obviously by putting everything up together, you're going to get some smaller scraps like this. I don't throw away. I use those as part of the stuffing of the character. And also larger scraps like this, then I save for wool applique or for decorating other characters or their noses, or projects, because you could fit a nose out of a piece of felt like that, or you could perhaps might not be able to fit an ear for this character, but you might for a hedgehog. And so I save these, or they might do for berries or for pennies, wool pennies on quilting. So again, try and hold on to your scraps if you can, and make your supplies go as far as possible, is just my suggestion. And likewise for the inside of the ear, I've come across a bit of fabric that I had from a leftover quilt that I made, which I think goes quite nicely. And so I'm going to use my ear patterns. I can just pop these on top, just make sure I avoid that selvage edge, because I've just realised there's a selvage edge on there. So I'll just pop a pin on here for now. And then we can pop the other one up here, look, and put that back up together again. And then we'll cut those out of the, so this is for the ear lining. So just audition up some fabrics you've got from your stash, from your scrap basket. Just see what you like the look of, and then you'll be able to get your ears to inserts to be matching with your character. Okay, we're nearly there to start and talk about sewing this character. So make sure you've got your coordinating thread available as well. And when you're making things like this where you've got two matching, always pop them together and just make sure that they're the same size, so that you've got that absolutely right. Okay, let's move on to construction. Okay, so for making these dolls, you don't need any fancy sewing machine. Mine's fairly basic one, really, but it works really well. You can use a walking foot if you've got one with your machine. That also does work well, but again, I've made lots of these characters without, so you don't need to worry about that if you've not got one of those. The first thing that I'm going to work on is my ears, because I like those to be done first. So I'm going to pop the fabric so that they are right sides together. Some people call it the pretty side together, whichever way works for you. And I'm just going to leave a pin in here. Now, if you wanted to, put a pin at the end, at the start, one in the middle. I'm jumping ahead, aren't I? Because I've done a few and I'm forgetting that I need to be telling you as beginners how to do things. So that's how we do things. So I'd pin with 3 like that. If you want to go around and tack this first, you can do, but that's I don't tend to, because the pins hold it in place, and the more modern way is not to. And there's some leeway for manoeuvre on these characters to a point that will allow you to work effectively just with pins. There are places where I will tell you to use tacking stitches in order to get, and it's something precisely right, but for now we can just use pins. So the other thing is that we're going to talk about as well is that we've added a 1/4 inch seam allowance to my pattern pieces. You might have a stitch line to sew around, but for me I prefer to work with a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the edge, and that is because I can use my presser foot. So this is my normal presser foot, and I don't know if you can see here, let me just see if I can pop this onto something so you can see. So between here, there's the metal of the outside of the presser foot, and then there's a plastic inside. And I can see there's a difference. So this bit here is transparent and this bit isn't. So I often match up where my needle position is with this line just here of where the transition is between the plastic and the metal to give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so long as we're consistent all the way around, everything should fit together nicely. So that's how I sew my characters. So I will line the cut edge up with where that transparency changes. And then I will, once I've got my fabric underneath my presser foot, so this is the presser foot that holds the fabric into place, and then I will take a couple of stitches forward and then a couple of stitches back with my reverse button, and then I will use either my needle down button, which is this one just here on my machine. I don't think I can show you. I'll zoom in so that I can show you. It's that one just there. Or if you don't have a needle down button, you can also use the hand crank, which is here, and you can use that to move that down and to put your needle down into your work, because then it will hold it still for you whilst you're sewing without it giving you a little jig in your stitches when you don't use that. So I always use this. Now my machine has a function where it always will stop sewing now with the needle in the work, but if not, just use your hand crank in order to do that. Once we've got our fabric anchored, we can take out our first pin, and then we're just going to carry on around our stitches. Now we can carry on until we get so far with our stitching, but at some stage we've got to try and turn this fabric to sew around this curve. And this is also why I like to start off with a nib, because it's nice and easy for you to see and to get used to using your machine. So then here I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot. Now that piece of fabric is anchored completely in there, and I can move this piece of fabric any way I like without losing my place. So all I do is move the fabric slightly for the next 2 to 3 stitches. Let me just move my threads out of the way because they're in the way. So do 2 to 3 stitches and stop, and then I can change direction again just by lifting up that presser foot, changing it. And you get used to doing this really quickly when you're sewing these characters. And do a few more and then change around. So what I'm trying to avoid doing is sewing when I'm pulling my fabric so that it gets a crease in it, because that will make it all distort and you'll lose some of the integrity of your shape. So by just doing this little simple thing where you just lift up the presser foot, move it slightly, do the next few stitches, and some of it you can move the fabric around slightly, but sometimes it wants to bunch, and then lift it up, release that tension on that shape, and then we've got a tighter curve here. So now I start to use that shape again just to change direction, and I'm coming to the other pin, and then we're going to reverse stitch at the end as well. So I'm just changing that direction. Now I'll take my needle out of the work, lift up my presser foot, and then we're going to cut off our starting and our stopping threads. I always trim both sets of threads every time I stop, and then we've got a nice curve on that ear for the stitching. So it works really well. Let's do the other one. Take our fabric, put those right sides together, put our pins in. And I've sewn this with the cotton fabric on top just because I think that the felt is thicker, and so it just means that I can kind of control it better. It's not going to crease. So let's do the same thing again. A couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work, take out the first pin, and then we're going to start and sew round. So again, change that direction. So showing you in real time, just to show you that I still take my time doing these little bits, because it does take, you can take time to unpick them otherwise if you rush it. So I'm not somebody who you'll see zooming around all the time on their sewing machine. I'm wanting to get a good finish. So that's that. So that's 2 ears done. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to help these ears turn out the right way round. Put those head pieces there for a moment. And to do this, because the curve on the outside here is larger than the curve on the inside here, you'll see what I mean in a minute. If we just turn this through now without doing anything with this seam, when we turn the ear round like that, you can see this ridge. Can you see that ridge underneath the stitching? And if you feel it with your finger, just try turning one out just on its own, you'll feel it's quite bumpy. So just leave that one like that for a moment so you can see the difference. And then let's go to the other one. Let's put the felt side, I mean, it doesn't really matter which side up you're going to go. And then what I want you to do is using some scissors, but just use the points of your scissors, the nose I call it, and you're going to take out some little triangles. They're just tiny, tiny little triangles. Just like that. I save these and just pop them in my stuffing again. But that's what you want to try and give yourself, a little snip like that. And we're going to, so the rule of thumb is that the tighter the curve, the closer together your little snips should be. And if you look, I'm going almost up to, but not through those stitches. So let's have a look on this side. You can probably see better on that side, look. I'm not going right up to the stitches, but I'm going within a millimetre or two. And we're going to do that all the way around. Now, if you want to make quite a few of these dolls, you might find it's a good investment to get some of these scissors, which are called pinking shears in the UK, or where I learnt to sew, and they've got these triangular blades on them, because when you snip close to but not through your stitches again, going round, you get those little triangles without having to make your own on the edge. So it's just quicker. But you may not have those, and if you don't, then this will work perfectly well. So now we've got one ear without any snipping done on it, and the other one we're going to turn round now with that snipping done on it. And although we've got a little bit of a ridge, it's not as prominent as the other one, and if we put our fingers on it, it's smooth. So there's the two to compare. Can you see how bulky this ear looks compared to that one? Let's do it that way and show you. And see how lovely and smooth this edge is now, whereas this one here is quite bulky. And that's called snipping into your clipping a curve is what it's called in dressmaking terms, but it just makes a lovely smooth edge to it. So I always snip my curves, and I use the pinking shears just for speed, but as I say, you can just cut those little triangles in, but at least now you know why that makes a difference, why you should do it. Or you could choose whether you do it or not, obviously, but why I would recommend you do it. And then that's ear now is perfectly together. Just match your ears up, just have a little look. They don't have to be exactly identical, but you want them to be similar in width and in depth. And then we're going to pop these just to one side, and then we'll work on those again in a minute. So just put those somewhere where you're not going to lose those. Put those little bits over to one side. Okay. The next thing we're going to do now is we're going to take our head pieces. Now remember I said that you needed your nose to be able to touch like this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take one so that these are right sides together. So we're going to put one on top of the other, and we're going to match the nose. So let's just do that. So I put a pin at the top there, and then we're going to have a look down here at the bottom, and where we've got the neck edge where the opening is going to be, we're going to put another pin in there. And then on this nose edge, you can see a slight difference in mine, look. You do get some variations when you're cutting out, but the rest of the head is pretty much the same, so make sure you got that right. The first thing we're going to sew on this character is from this nose point down around the chin, going to come to the neck edge, and then we're going to come down the neck edge to the bottom. So let's get that set up on our machine. It's still with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and 1/4 inch is 1/2 centimetre, I think, if you're in using metric, or if you're a bit more modern than me. I use inches, and because I use quilt as well, so it depends on which you prefer. And again, we're going to take a couple of stitches forward with our 1/4 inch seam allowance and a couple of stitches back, and then put our needle in our work before we take out our first pin. Then that's all anchored down. Now we can carry on, taking our time, just following that curve around. Make sure you don't straighten off the curve, otherwise you'll lose the chin for your character. So again, let's just change that direction just slightly. So a bit more, change the direction slightly, so a bit more, change direction slightly, just doing that pivoting technique. And we're just going to go just past the end of the seam, just 1/4 inch into the body. And we can check that by leaving our needle in the work, lift up your presser foot and spin your work, and then just see if your 1/4 inch mark on your presser foot is in the right place. And if it is, then you can carry on. If not, you can take a stitch forward, or you might need to take a stitch backwards. So once we've got that ready, then we can just sew down the neck, and we're going to reverse at the end of the neck. It's very important to reverse at the end of the neck. Needle out of the work. Ooh, mine's got tangled. And then we're going to cut off our stopping threads and cut off our starting threads. So there we've got our chin seam sewn. Okay, so the next thing then I'm going to do, once I've worked out what's wrong with my thread, which is all fine now, is we're going to get to the head gusset. Now, we had a straight edge at one end of the head gusset, and we had a curved edge at the other side. So it's the curved edge we want to use. We're going to fold this piece of fabric in half, and we're going to make sure that it's symmetrical as well, because that does matter. Mine might not be 100%, so I'm just going to trim that off. Yes, I've got a bit of a curved edge on one and a bit of a straight edge on another. Let's just trim that little bit off. Only a little bit, but it might make a difference. And then on the edge, where that fold line is, we're going to pop a pin right on the edge, just where that fold line is, just like that. Okay. So it's on the curved edge. The straight edge is here, look. We're not the straight edge, on that curved edge. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open up our head. So we're looking at the inside of the head. We're going to put our felt so that we've got the right side down, and we're going to separate out this seam allowance. Just put your fingers between the seam allowance and separate that out. And then where that pin is, you want it to go right directly on top of this seam line here. So where that is, and then take your pin out that was holding the mark, and now just put it in to hold it together. So you can see that head gusset sitting in between the two sides of the head. Now we're going to work with one side of the head first, so let's now go down to the straight edge of the neck, because this is now going to come down to the straight edge at the back of the head. So we can put a pin in here. And the other match point that we need is at the end of the curve where you've got the brow here. Let me just get the pattern piece to show you, because sometimes it's easy to see on the pattern piece. So where we've got point B, the transition just here, where it goes from round the nose to start to come in across the forehead, then where we've got that transition, we're going to put that directly on top of the angle in the head. So match point B on the side headpiece with point B on your nose, your head gusset. Once we've got that in, we're then going to just match up this, go back to the neck edge, and we're just going to match up the edges of the head gusset against the side of the head. And this curve should fit really nicely together. All the way down to that brown. Just make sure you match your raw edges together correctly, because this is what's giving you the shape for your character. So there we've got the flat edge of the head. So that piece there, all flat. I've not just pinned this bit just a little for the moment, just bear with me. And then on here, this is bunching up a little bit, but this is what's going to give us the shape around the back of the head. So what we're doing is we're attaching this part here, which is the head gusset, to these side pieces here, one there and one there, and then that's going to form the nose. So there's the chin seam down the bottom there. It's going to form up under the nose. Okay. So we know we've got our neck edge with the straight edge matched here. We know we've got the pin that we put on the halfway point across the nose matched onto the seam just there. And then we know that we've pinned all the way along the edge across the head here. So what we need to do now is we're just going to put a little bit of tension on the felt between point A and point B, just to stretch it just slightly, just to curve it just slightly. And your warm fingers and a little bit of tugging with your hands will just stretch that to give it a little bit of shape. And when you've done that, you should be able to pin on this nose with a couple of pins in order to get this to go right, to sit right for you. So I'm going to tack this first one because I think it can be better to match it up. So you need to make sure at this point here we don't lose any length on that nose. So to really make sure that your raw edges match up together. I think the noses are one of the most important parts of the Lilly Rose Dolls characters. I do think they need to be as right as you can get them. Okay, so let me get some tacking thread. Let's use this nice bright blue. Any contrast colour, I would suggest you have a contrast colour because that does make it easier to see when you want to pull it out. You can have it single, it doesn't matter. And then I'm just going to put a knot on the end, and there is a video on how to make the quilter's knot that I use on my video if you want to learn that technique. Okay, let's start down at the neck edge, and I'm on the head side, so let's just take a stitch down on the, I'm just going to take it just slightly larger than I think the 1/4 inch is going to be. The idea is that ideally we don't stitch over our tacking threads, but if we have to, then we do. And as you start to make progress, you can take your pins out. Bring my pincushion over. And you're still making sure that when you take your pins out and you've got your tacking stitches in, which are only just big stitches like that your raw edges are together. I think a lot of people have started with Bertie Bear, so that's why I'm just going into a little bit more detail. I mean, I still go into quite a lot of detail in my videos anyway, but a little bit more detail, so I'm trying to think back to being a beginner again and what you might want to know from if this is the first character you've ever made. Take out the pins as we go. And the tacking stitches just save you from pricking yourself while you're sewing or a pin getting stuck into your machine, all of those kind of things. As you get more experienced, you'll perhaps be able to skip some of this these tacking stitches, but if you're a beginner it can be a nice little thing to do. It just gives you that confidence that things are going to work out. So I'm coming down, make sure you've got no loops in your threads, coming down to this nose, or the bridge of the nose really, where the eyes are going to sit. Then I'm going to change direction and go around the nose. Try not to tighten up your stitches too much, you don't want to put them under any tension. And we're only going as far as, in my case, this yellow pin halfway along the nose at this point. I've found that doing it in two halves is better than trying to do it all at once. So once we get down towards this nose, I'm then going to just take a double stitch just to cast off that thread. Oops. My thread's not cooperating for me. Has a mind of its own sometimes, doesn't it? Okay, that's it. Pull that through. And a double stitch at the end there with a little tail should hold that for you. So now we can take out the other pins. And we're just going to have a look at our tacking. So I can see that my head is flat here all the way around, all the way down. And then I have a look on this side too, and I can see that that's all flat. I've not tacked in a fold in my fabric at all. If you have, you need to take your tacking stitches out and do it again. And we can also test this by just with the tacking stitches, if we're careful, that if we turn this around, we can see that when we've sewn this down and turn this around, we're going to get a nice head on our character. Don't pull it too much though, otherwise your tacking stitches will come undone. I'm going to sew it with the flat side head down against my sewing machine because that piece is flat, and then it allows me to move this extra fabric here out of the way as I'm sewing. This will all make sense as you see me do it. So let's just start here. So let's measure up for our 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, and then we're going to put our needle in our work as we always do, whether by hand or using the button. We're going to now very carefully follow the shaping of the back of the head with our seam allowance. So if you're following your stitching line, you're going to have to follow your stitching line, but for me I'm following with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, using my presser foot as my guide. So I can start to sew, and I can start to change direction. I can twist it slightly with my hand here as I go, just gently. And then when it starts to get a bit too bunched up, I'm going to stop. I'm going to lift up my presser foot, and I'm going to move some of the fullness of this felt out of the way, just so that the next inch under my presser foot is flat, and I can feel it with my finger here to make sure that there's no creases underneath in the actual felt on the other side. And then we're going to take a few more stitches. Then we're going to stop, lift up our presser foot, move that fullness back again, and just twist the angle slightly. So again, 1/4 inch, make sure that that is working well. Presser foot up, move the fullness back. Again, we've got a lot to be manoeuvring, but we can do it. And then round again. So coming down now the forehead, so let's just make sure we get that shaping nice. Then you're going to reach a point where you have to put on that point B where you put your needle in your work, and then you're going to change direction. So needle in the work, lift up your presser foot and change direction now to come out over the nose. And we now need to make sure that that halfway point is right on the nose. So let's keep going round gently, carefully. And then we're going to just be pulling this felt around. I think my stitches have come undone slightly, which isn't so good for me. And then we're going to stop on that halfway point. You have got a little bit of leeway on the end of the nose because it's covered by that other colour, so don't worry too much, but try and do your very best. So let me just take my threads off, stopping threads and my starting threads, and let's have a little look. So now I can see that on the nose point there, this was my chin and my neck. Under there, those stitches have joined together, and I can see on here my stitching at 1/4 inch seam allowance is nice and smooth to that point. Then I change direction and go across, and there's no puckers and no creases stitched into that. And again here, all the way round, there's no puckers and no creases. If you find that you have got a crease in your stitching, don't worry. Just go to the point where you've got the crease, use a quick unpick, which is one of these, which are really a sewer's best tool really, other than a sewing machine. Go to where the top of the fold is, and you're going to use your quick unpick to take that stitch out. There's a little blade in the middle of your quick unpick, just in that little V shape there, not on the end here, that's for picking up stitches, but the actual cutting is done by the blade in there. And what you do is you just pick up a stitch and then push your quick unpick on it, and the blade will cut the stitch. Undo 2 stitches either side of your crease, and then just feel it with your fingers so it flattens. And once it feels flattened, then you know you're ready to start stitching it again. If undoing 2 stitches doesn't flatten it down, undo another one either side of it until you can feel that it feels flat with your fingers. And at that point then you can put your piece of work back into your sewing machine, and you're going to start a few stitches, 3 or 4 stitches before you cut it, or before your last stitch that's intact. Start there, you don't need to reverse, just go over the top of those stitches, over the gap, and then continue on past for 3 or 4 stitches afterwards, and then you can then take your work out and you'll have reinforced that seam area. Because puckers, unfortunately, are one of those things that just happen. Once we've done all of that, we can then use and we're happy with it, or as happy as you can be if it's your first time, but just remember to give yourself some grace. You will learn more as you go on. And then we're going to take out our tacking threads. Just use the nose of your, or the point of your quick unpick to unpick those until you get to a point where you can go back down to your knot, and then you can just pull and those will just come out for you cleanly. And then you've not prickled yourself with any of the pins, have you, or stabbed yourself with those. Okay, so I've got a little bit of blue thread there. So if you've got some thread that's just left over, just cut it off very close to your piece of work, and just have a look and see if you can see where the end is on the inside. Just means your sewing machine has gone through your tacking stitches, and it just needs taking out slightly, that's all. Okay, so now we're looking like this. So that's the side head we've just sewn. That's the one side of the head gusset that we've just sewn, and now we need to sew the other side on. So now we're going to match up our neck edge again, because our nose is already connected. So just pull out the other part of the gusset. Let's put our pins in. Start with one down here. Let's go to that point B, because that point B is really important. So point B, where the shaping changes on both, let's put a pin in there to hold that together. And now we can go back and just match up those raw edges on the back of the head. Just tuck in the fabric and it will fit. Well, we know it fits because it's already done the other side, and we know they're both cut from the same pattern. If you get a fold like this, don't worry, just keep going. It will all, when you sort of push it inside, it will, and just use your fingers, the heat of your fingers, and just manipulate the fabric, just squeeze it between your fingers, and you just flatten those fibres down so they behave. Just make sure your raw edges are together, that's the most important thing. Then again down to the forehead here. Put a pin in there to hold that. So that's got all of that area all right. Let's go back to here again, and remember how we just stretched those little fibres out slightly on the top of that nose? Just pull those fibres slightly until you can, I'm going to have the gusset side facing me, until you can push that edge in, and you're going to get your raw edges together. I always think the second side is slightly more difficult to get in, but it will work. So you see how I'm just smooshing those fibres down, put those raw edges together. Pin just there, and then I'm going to put a little pin just in there as well. Okay, so that's my pinning to show you. So let's tack this again so we get the very best result possible. Okay, so we're back to tacking again. So I'm going to work on the gusset side, I think, this time. I keep changing my mind, don't I? But it just depends how you feel with it, when it feels in your hand. So let's start off those stitches again. I've got a knot, I've got my thread double, and I've got a knot at the bottom. And I'm just putting the needle through so that the raw edges are going to stay together. Quite big stitches, as you can see, in order just to hold that. Get my pin cushion. And the stitches take the place of the pins, so it holds it together for you without them getting in your way while you're trying to sew this seam. Once you have done a few, you can try just using pins, and you'll have seen in other videos I just tend to use pins, but if this is your first character, then we want you to get it as perfect as possible, so that you'll then become a fan of these characters and want to make more. Okay, so just working all the way around. Take your pins out as you go. I'll just mess my thread up. And we're going to make sure that all the time with your fingers, just keep aligning those raw edges together. Just coming down the forehead now. Take these pins out as you go, because it's less for your thread to get wrapped up on. And I can see just there, I've got a fold in my fabric. Can you see just there? So I know that I need to just smooth that out before I put any stitches in to hold it together. Just make sure you pull the other half of your head out. You only want to be going through 2 layers of your fabric, your outer and your gusset. And then your stitches can come a little bit smaller while you're coming round doing your nose, because we want that to be really nicely held together. The pins are doing a good job of holding those edges together for me. Make sure your nose is out the way as you go round. You don't want to be having anything folded underneath and be tacking in. And then we're going to go in towards that nose at the end again. And I'm going to take a stitch just past it, just because that will help anchor everything down. And then I'm going to do my double stitch just there to cast off my tacking threads. Just leave a tail. So for my second side, here we go. So we'll just check it again. So flat on the side of the head, that fabric can all lie flat. And then on this side here, we're making sure we've not tacked in any puckers at all, and we can see the change of direction and then round to the end of the nose. Yep. Hopefully yours looks like that as well. So let's go back to our sewing machine. And I'm still going to put I'm going to have to put the gusset side under, I think, this time, because that's the way that it feels comfortable for me to sew it. Just when you put your thing down in the machine, can you see how the head's wanting to fold underneath? Just pull that at the neck edge, just pull that other side of the head out the way so that you're not going to stitch it by mistake. Thread to the back of the machine. Take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work. No pins to remove, but it just helps us just take our breath and everything's anchored now. So now, using our 1/4 inch, we're going to now mirror the cut edge of our fabric. Just sewing at 1/4 inch. And I can feel underneath here, you can see how that's all bunching up. I can feel that. So let's leave the needle in the work, lift up the presser foot, and I'm just going to pull on the other side of the head seam that we've already done, and I'm sort of rolling the fabric around towards me a bit, and then I can flatten it down. Remember, just the inch in front of you. Press a foot back down again, a few more stitches. It's feeling like it's bunching up again, so needle in the work, lift the presser foot up, and move that fullness of the felt back towards the back for you. Change direction slightly for the curve, and then carry on. Just try that again. Yeah, everything's fine. You can stop as many times as you like, remember, just make sure you're confident and go as slow as you need. Even if you're just doing one stitch at a time, it doesn't matter. Keep coming down until we need to change direction at point B. Let's check our seam allowance. Let's put our needle in the work, press foot up, and then let's change direction. And on the end of the nose here, I just want to pull out the other side of the face away. So I'm just on the other side of the nose and just pulling that out of the way so that I've got a nice flat section to sew. Change my direction, that's it. And I've got some pressure on with my hand this side so that it can curve slightly. Needle up again. Sorry, not needle up, press the foot up again. Extra fabric out of the way, so that we can get around to the end of this nose. And I tend to go over my seam allowance when it's open, because then I can see the join in the fabric at the end. And then just reverse at that noise point. Press the foot up, needle out of the work. You can breathe again. Take off our stopping threads and our starting threads. Let's have a little look. So I can see on the end of the nose, hopefully you can see how those stitches are all curved and they've joined at the nose. And when I come underneath here, I can see the stitches have pretty much joined together with the nose, with the seam allowance open on the chin. So once we're happy with that, let's go back to our quick unpick. Let's undo our tacking stitches. Oh, we've checked for any check for any puckers in your stitching, so I'm fine. And make sure your seam allowance, that's quite narrow just there, but I think it'll be okay. No, we'll do it again. I'll show you how to do it again. And round the back here, that's all fine. So here I can see my seam allowance has gone less than 1/4 inch, and if we're not careful, because it doesn't match this side of the head will be more bulgy and sticking out than the other. So what I'm going to do, because the machine stitching is going to hold my pieces of felt together. Let's just take out the tacking threads first. Got a place here where my threads have got sewn over. I'll show you how to undo those in a second. Let's take out the ones where we want to. So we only take out the tacking stitches once we've checked that everything's okay with the seam that we've just sewn. Although this one isn't quite, but I know I've got stitches holding it together, so that's why I know I can take it out. Let's go down to the knot and we can pull that out. Where my stitches have gone over the top of my tacking threads, this is where a different colour tacking thread does help, because you can pull it out. You can identify easily what needs to come out. Just pull out what you can. If things feel like they're stuck, just go and cut off one end close to the edge. It just means, because the thread is twisted when you sew with it, it just means that it's got caught. And you go to the other side and you should be able to pull that out. Just gently, try not to pull too hard. You don't want to break any of your stitches. We're only wanting to break off that tacking thread. If you get close enough to it, it should just pull straight out. Okay, there's no tacking stitches left there. So now I'm going to put this back into my machine and I'm going to sew around the back of this head again. So let's have a go. So I've identified with a pin that my seam allowance is okay there. And I can identify that my seam allowance is okay down here. So let's put a pin in there. So it's just between these section here that I'm going to re-sew. So I'm going to start a few stitches beyond my pin or before my pin. Just a few. Just need to be on that same line. Don't need to reverse, and just start stitching on top of those stitches. And I'm just taking that seam just a little bit wider, making sure the bulk of the felt stays out the way. Then I'm just coming down to where it is, stop and take my pin out, and then sew over the top of the stitches where it was okay. And that's just increased that seam allowance there where I needed that extra edge to make sure that they're going to be even when we then turn this round. Okay. Do you know, we've finished with the sewing machine for now. Let's switch that off and get that out the way. Right. So just like before, we've got some curved edges, and so we can do some snipping. I'm going to use my pinking shears again. But when you're pinking shears with something that's like this, a bit more 3D than just flat, always make sure that you hold the excess fabric away with your hands, because you don't want to snip into anything that you don't want. You can't get too close because you're going to compromise your seam, but if you just take off so that it's towards like that, you should be fine. Nothing worse than getting a head half stuffed and then having to go back and reinforce a seam. So take slightly less if you're not sure. I don't tend to take anything off the nose. That tends to be okay. Just tends to be over the top of the head and around the back of the head where we need to. Okay. A bit more for stuffing, which we can use in a minute. Okay. So the other thing that I do as well is just to put a little cut in towards that V there. So just put a little V just there, up, not right up to, leave a millimetre or two away from your felt, and then we can also just put some little V's down the bottom here under this chin seam, so that's going to sit nicely. We want it to be nice and smooth for that seam, but the stuffing will help, and felt does have a little bit of give to it as well, so that does help with your seams. Okay, so we've got a few little cuts along there just to help that all last, and then we've got both sides just trimmed. So now's the moment of truth. So put your thumbs inside, reach for part of it, and you're better to push than you are to pull on felt. So just ease that felt back on the neck so it folds backwards, and then we're just going to gently just push this felt through with our thumbs. And then we're going to start and feel on each of the seams and just pull our felt apart so that we can just see our stitches. This is our first look at our nose as well. And this join here, which is all looks good. And make sure that you push out your felt properly so you can see your stitches along that chin edge as well. Some of that we'll do when we're stuffing as well, so don't worry, but it's just important to know that you've got to sort of push that shape in. So this is what our character's looking like now. Now it's hard to believe when you do this that eventually your head is going to look like that, because at this stage it's very kind of unimpressive and you're going to feel like you've done it slightly wrong, but you haven't. You will get to this Bertie Bear at some stage. So I take the little bits of felt that you've seen me off and I've just popped those into the head. So that's there. Let me get my stuffing.